Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of The Crazy World We Die In. Now in this video I'm going to be talking about the great actor Sidney Poitier, who sadly passed away 3 years ago this week. Now if this is the first time you've been on my channel, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. So I often do these videos where I look back in history, I look back on a particular day or a particular week, and then I talk about the person who is sadly no longer with us, and in this case, like I've just mentioned, it is Sidney Poitier. So now I'm not going to go in massive depth into Sidney Poitier, but I'm going to talk about his early life and then some of his accomplishments. But before I continue, if you could do me a favor, if you like any of this content, if you could press that like button, press that subscribe button, and please feel free to comment on this video. So I'm just going to touch on Sidney Poitier's early life first. So he was the youngest of 7 siblings, and his family was actually from the Bahamas. What would happen was his family would often travel to Miami and they would sell various farm products. So what happened was, on one of these trips, Sidney Poitier's mother actually gave birth to Sidney, who was actually 2 months premature. So what I actually learned was that he was not actually expected to survive. In this case, thankfully he did. And what that meant is, because he was born in Miami, he was actually a US citizen. So like I mentioned, Sidney was from the Bahamas and that's where he grew up. But however, at the age of 15, he moved to Miami. However, Miami was quite a difficult place for Sidney Poitier because of racism. Now, you got to remember, at this time, it was the Jim Crow era in Florida and racism was rife. And for a 15-year-old boy, he really struggled to deal with this. So what did Sidney do? Sidney decided that he was going to get into acting and he's going to move to New York City. So at the age of 16, he moved to New York City to try and pursue a career in acting. Now this was quite a testing time for Sidney Poitier. So at various times he was sleeping at bus stations, he was doing a number of menial jobs just to try and get by. Now during this time, in 1943, the Second World War was taking place. So the Second World War, we all know, it was from 1939 to 1945. Now, in November 1943, Sidney enlisted in the army. So he was 16 years old at the time, but he lied about his age. He was actually assigned to a vet's admin in New York, which was a hospital that dealt with patients. So during this period, it could have been because of the connections that he had with some of these patients. He became really upset about the way that the hospital were treating these patients, and he wanted out. So he was in the army, however, he had been enlisted. So what he done, which again you could actually say was quite clever, is that he feigned mental health. He feigned that he had a mental health issue, and as a result he was discharged from the army. So Sidney was discharged from the army and he was now back on his mission to become an actor. So what did he do next? So he actually auditioned for what was called the American Theatre. I can't say the middle word as I don't want to get myself in trouble, but I'm sure if you look up Sidney Poitier you will know. And he failed on his first audition, and there were a number of reasons for this. Now first of all, it's mentioned that he was actually tone deaf, and what was sort of expected for performers such as Sidney was that they were able to sing. So like I mentioned, he was tone deaf and he was expected to sing, and if you're tone deaf and you're expected to sing, it's not going to work. He also had an issue when it came to reading. So what I learned is that an elderly Jewish waiter actually sat with him for months, teaching him how to read by using newspapers, and I think that was really good of him, and it certainly worked. On his next audition, he was successful. We finally got into the American theatre and he started to make a name for himself. So now we're just going to move on to obviously Sidney Poitier and the success that he had. So we're going to move to 1958 and we're going to talk about The Defiant Ones. Now if you haven't seen this film, I would recommend you see it. So this was a film where Sidney Poitier made history. He made history by being the first African American to receive a nomination for Best Actor. Now he starred in this film with Tony Curtis, and I'm just going to talk about The Defiant Ones. Again, if you've seen it, let me know what you thought about it in the comments. So The Defiant Ones is about 2 escaped prisoners, one black, one white, and they're basically shackled together and they need to work together to try and escape the people that are trying to pursue them. So during this journey, they come across a number of different obstacles. They have to work together and their relationship sort of develops between them. And I don't want to give any spoilers, but as the film develops, you see the different people that they deal with who have got different ideas about how they want to try and help them or not help them. And then it's got quite a good ending, which I actually really like. So The Defiant Ones, like I said, is 1958, but it certainly left a legacy. So in 1996, the film was remade into a film called Fled, which stars Lawrence Fishburne and Stephen Baldwin. And also for you gamers out there, and I'm a gamer myself, in the 2018 game Red Dead Redemption 2, there's an optional quest which is based on this film, with a white man called Mr. Black and a black man called Mr. White. Now, we move to 1967. So in 1967, Sidney Poitier probably starred in 3 of arguably his most famous films. All 3 films have a similar theme dealing with race. Now, the first one is called To Sir With Love. Now, this film was actually set in England, and it deals with issues in a secondary school where Sidney Poitier plays a teacher and he has to deal with a number of different things. So that was the first film. Quite a good film, actually. If you haven't seen it, like I'm probably going to say with most of his films today, go and check it out. Now, the second film I'm going to talk about, which I think is quite famous, is Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. So this is the film that deals with interracial marriage. And you've got to remember, at the time, interracial marriage was actually banned in a number of US states. And again, if you haven't seen this film, it deals with the main character who returns home from Hawaii, I think it is, and she basically has a 10-day romance and she's now married to Sidney Poitier. Imagine the issues that this brought, and it's a really, really good film, actually. And the last film from 1967, which I think is probably the most famous out of the 3, is In the Heat of the Night. Now, you'll remember his character, Mr. Tibbs, and he says that line, "They call me Mr. Tibbs." Well, yeah, this is the film that it's from, if you've heard the line and you don't know where the actual line is from. And to show how popular this film was actually nominated for 7 Oscars, and it won 5 of them, including Best Picture. So, yeah, if you haven't seen it, go and see it, especially if you're a fan of film. Now, when we're talking about other Sidney Poitier films, now if you watch any of my videos, I've mentioned in a number of them a film which I absolutely love. I love as a kid. It's one of my favorite films of all time, and it was one of the films, he done 3 films in a row with Bill Cosby. So this was the second one that he did. Let's Do It Again. Great film. Again, I'm going to sing it and I'll say it in probably many more videos coming up. I love this film, and if you haven't seen it, please go and watch it. But Sidney Poitier was in that film. It was actually the first time that I was introduced to him, because I remember watching this when I was a young boy, and I loved it. And yeah, I've got a real soft spot for Sidney Poitier because of this film. But along with acting, Sidney Poitier then moved into directing as well. So again, it shows that this is a man of many talents, and you know, we've got to take our hat off to him. We've got to salute him because he's one of the best that's ever done it. So another thing that I learned, and I didn't know this until I done some research, was that in 1974, Sidney Poitier was actually granted an honorary knighthood by Queen Elizabeth II. I didn't know that. And then I had to say to myself, well, what is an honorary knighthood? I've never heard of that before. So, honorary knighthood is given to somebody who is not a citizen of the Commonwealth realm. So I thought, okay, that's really, really interesting. And is there any limitations on that? And there is. So they can't actually use Sir at the beginning. In this case, they can't actually use Sir at the beginning of their name. So you couldn't call himself Sir Sidney Poitier, or Dame if it was a lady. But in this case, we're talking about Sidney. So yes, he couldn't use Sir at the beginning of his name. In 2009, he was presented with the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Obama. And another thing I learned about Sidney Poitier, and I would never have guessed this, that did you know that he was fluent in Russian? How random is that? If you had to pick a language, I certainly wouldn't have picked Russian, but yeah, apparently he was absolutely fluent in it. It's the little things that you get to learn about somebody. Now, we all remember Training Day. Great film with Denzel Washington. And if you remember, and if you're a fan of film, you remember Denzel won Best Actor for Training Day and was the second African-American actor to win it. The first person being Sidney Poitier. And he won it for his role in Lilies of the Field. Now, Lilies of the Field was a film which came out in 1963. I haven't seen it actually, and it's one of the things I'm going to do after I finish making this video is I'm going to make a point of seeing this film, but I haven't seen it. So if you have seen it, let me know. Was it a good film? I know it was nominated for Best Picture, but it didn't win it. Is it worth seeing, and how good was Sidney's performance in it? Another thing I learned about Sidney Poitier was that he was a member on the board for the Walt Disney Company. And again, it's no surprise, but he does have a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Sidney Poitier was also a survivor of prostate cancer. So guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. I said I just wanted to do this short video because it is the 3-year anniversary of Sidney Poitier's death. Great actor, somebody that I always remember from my childhood. Rest in peace to Sidney Poitier. Guys, like I said at the beginning of this video, if you like this content, any of the content that I do, please press that like button, press that subscribe button, and please feel free to comment. I will always reply back to any comments that I see. Guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Crazy World We Die In. Take care.